Thank you for being here. I love your book, How to Raise a Feminist Son. It was really one of my favorite books. I just love it. It spoke to me so intensely. And I pulled this quote that I love, and it's actually from the beginning of your book. It says, "May voices of young men all over America and India and Ireland and Saudi Arabia and Nigeria rise up together in a big, thunderous chant. Something broke my heart." I want you to introduce yourself and kind of give people who don't really know you a background on you and what inspired you to write this and where you're at, and then we can talk a little bit.
All right. Thank you, Kimmy. Yeah, thanks for pulling that quote because, it really to me is about going to the heart of boys, right? And to the love that they're capable of. I mean, for me, it's an act of love to raise a boy as a feminist because, as I say in the book, one thing was for a moment when I had the baby, there was the fear of, what kind of man is he going to turn out to be? Will he be like the men I've known? And will he be violent toward me, maybe? But then also, when I decided that I was going to raise him as a feminist, the sense of like, is it bad for him? Sort of the mother coming in. So, but before anything else, I'm a mother who loves her son, loves him dearly, even when he's making me mad. And, as a young adult, he makes me mad a lot. So first of all, that's a huge part of my identity. And then I was a journalist in India. I grew up in India. I was a journalist there for several years, there and in Singapore, before I moved to the US to do my PhD. And I've been teaching. I'm a professor at Seattle University, and I teach media studies, and I'm a feminist media scholar, and I'm a novelist, and I teach essay writing and fiction, etc. as well. So I think those are all my identities. And
I'm sure there are more in there. Yes.
Dog owner, my dog might make an appearance. And a feminist.
Yes. Yes. A feminist who it sounds like has been able to really heal from a lot of your conditioning. I mean, can you talk a little bit about your own journey to becoming a feminist before getting to How to Raise a Feminist?
Yeah, in India, for sure, it was such a, you're kind of steeped in it and you don't realize how patriarchy works there until you leave, maybe, and then the same way you leave the US and you realize, oh my goodness, that's so particular to the US.
You're like, that's very strange.
So my family was progressive in so many ways. My father was in the army. He, insisted that my mother finish her education and go on for higher. She's even more educated than him. And she was a working woman and a businesswoman. And we lived in Bombay, which is the modern city in India, in Mumbai. So in many ways, there was a very progressive kind of upbringing. But there are some things that are just so deeply entrenched in India. Like my brother definitely had more privileges than me. He was just a year older than me, but he got to sort of order me around. I cannot remember one time where my brother may have cooked something for me, but I was expected to, he would say, make me a sandwich when he came back from school. And I would just do it because I just felt like, yeah, that, it's what you do, right? But I could never say, you make me a sandwich. So things like that, just immediately, like just growing up as a child, they started to strike me as unfair, but also what it is, right? Like it is what it is kind of a thing. I was, there was a lot of domestic violence in my family. My father was violent. My brother learned violence from him, practiced on me. There's a lot of physical violence. And then there was all this, array of men on the bus, on the doctors, faith healers, uncles, like all kinds of men that for whom my body was just a thing that they could have access to and assault, like going down. And the first time was when I was 8 and I was riding an elevator, rushing to go play with my friends. And sometimes I think about that little girl, I think about the little girl who's just rushing because she's late to meet up with her friends, and then this man does something that she doesn't even understand. Like he puts his hands on, he put his hands on, I wasn't even developed, on my breasts, or my chest. That's all it was, right? And then inside me, and I don't know what's going on. And he's smiling at me, so I'm confused about, is this supposed to be a thing? Is this normal? And then I go and play, and I don't know have the words to say what happened. So I just go on and play with my friends, but my life has changed forever. Something has definitely changed. And this 8-year-old girl is changed, and she's quiet and doesn't know what's going on. So, I feel like crying for that little girl. So there was that growing up in India, because there's a culture of silence, because there's a culture of shame around these things, right? But then also in the US, the disappointment for me was how there's the glass ceiling, because here I come as a professional woman, right? And I see that this ideal that we had, that in the West, women could have anything. They could do anything as long as they worked hard. All opportunities are open to them. And then hearing, one of the things that I remember, an assistant professor in the program where I came in to do my PhD, we were going out to a bar one night, and she said, "Oh, don't tell anyone that I'm a professor. I like to say teacher. Otherwise, guys won't flirt with me because they'll be intimidated." And to my mind, this thing that I had come here to be, right? I'd come here to get a PhD, and this woman who has one is disclaiming it, right? Lessening herself in order
for a man's pleasure or comfort.
Yes. And that shocked me, because for me, I felt like, no, I think that would be more attractive. That makes me more attractive. And to hear that it doesn't was a shock, because in India, your resume is really huge. Like, yes, of course, you could become unmarriageable by a certain point if you do.
Unmarriageable.
Yeah, a friend of mine has a book called Unmarriageable, Sonia. She said in Pakistan. But you could sort of like get, and I think that maybe I am that now, right? Divorces in, writing a book on feminism. I mean, come on.
I think you're more marriageable. Just the fact that you are so in your power, that you have a voice, it's a hard fought voice, and that you've done something meaningful with your life, not only with your love of your son, but then to use your education, use your status as a way to help other people. I mean, you're part of the democratizing of mental health care, of helping women get in touch with their own stuff around this, right? To really track and ask themselves deep questions so they can be more conscious.
Yeah.
So you're really helping so many people.
Yeah. And
I would marry you.
Kimmy, is that a proposal? I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And some of the language that we have now, right? Like give no fucks. I mean, that is so beautiful. To me, what a beautiful phrase, to give no fucks. I have no fucks to give, because once we embrace that, we know what that feels like. Right?
Totally. I mean, really.
It's so amazing, because I have no fucks to give.
Yeah.
And it's such a freeing thing. I mean, really, the only person whose feelings I care about is my son. I mean, of course, to some degree, I don't want to hurt people, but at the same time, raising a feminist son, also the gift of it is that you're free to be yourself.
Yes.
And your son can watch it, and he can like something or not like it, but mostly he just likes everything, or is indifferent to it.
But you're also changing his desire or tolerance of a powerful, beautiful human woman.
Yes.
And so that's a big thing, because then he will not be intimidated by someone with a PhD.
Thrilled. Yeah, I was so thrilled when he said that, this friend of mine, Ruth, that he ended up wanting that kind of combative woman, that he looked for that in his women friends, and even in a girlfriend, that he likes women who challenge him. And I was like, yes,
I did it.
Yeah, I did it.
You're like, where is my medal?
Right. Because we always fear, right? We fear that, oh, there'll be a backlash, and he may go the opposite way, or that's what people tell us, right? The men will say, oh no, don't do that, otherwise he'll hate women. No, they don't. There's no reason that a young boy would grow up hating women. If you're a loving, strong woman who
Yes.
loves herself, just be that. We
Yes.
have to, because you know what, you there's so many different ways to fail. Like there's like a whole spectrum of possibility of failure.
There is.
And we can try this, and we can try and be, like with Hillary Clinton, right? Like she did everything right. And yet there's this barrier, right? Like, so you can't just end up spending your entire lifetime thinking like you're doing the right things, because it's such a moving target. And I think of the book and I think, I hope no one thinks that this is one more task for women to do, right? Like, oh my goodness, you must now do this one other thing, is raise your son as a feminist or raise feminist boys. And toward that end, what I feel is, and what I hope I'm saying in the book too, is that it's more about just having this value system, right? Like, you track your feminist journey, think of, like, oh my goodness, it's because of feminism that I have what I have, or that I can walk the way I walk in the world, or I can laugh as loud as I want, and I can go hang out with my
I have such a
girlfriend.
loud laugh, right?
Oh, I love that, right? I love that, because it's just so important to hear that, right? To the sound of women, right? And I talk about gender, how sound is gendered. Um, so to love yourself and live this large life, and all the other things will come, right? Like, so I wasn't waking up every day and saying, all right, in the feminist thing, what do I need, need to do?
Like checklist, milk, and
Feminist son, right? But because I knew that it was like it's going, it's about living a feminist life, having the feminist lens and the language and the love, right? Like 3 L's maybe of like
oh, I like that.
how
Right.
to do that. Yeah, I wish I'd put that in the book, but yeah, just like that's what it's about, because then the more you do it, the more it becomes practice, right? Like that, once you start talking to your boys saying, hey, that's not the way we talk about girls, right? And let's not use these words.
It was interesting for me in your book to read about the increase in protein shakes and the desire to have a certain kind of body of masculinity. And of course, when I read that, it scared me for my son, because I was like, oh my God, how is he going to combat that? But then I keep going back to, if I'm self-loving and I love him and I don't judge him, that has to count for something. Like that intimacy and modeling has to count. It's
Yeah.
not everything, but it's something.
Right, absolutely. And then others around you start doing the same thing, right? Like if you're catching yourself, others are doing, and that's the thing. Like as long as it's spreading in culture, and we're seeing the body positivity movement, and we're seeing how people are embracing that and putting it on Instagram and like tweeting about it. Those are all things like we can bring into and say, oh my goodness, look at this man. He's so handsome, right? Like, and I talk about the things I regret, right? That I talked about that way about my own body. Like I was constantly on a diet and talking about, oh my goodness, I shouldn't. And then there was this one time when my son said, oh, maybe you shouldn't eat that. And I said, what? And he said, saying, you keep saying that you regret it and everything. And I said, you know what? I shouldn't be talking like that. And you don't ever say that to me again. But like, those things have to happen. Those errors, right, have to happen
Right.
to realize, oh my God, yeah, why wouldn't he say that? Because he hears me say that about myself all the time. And when I'm talking about regretting eating the slice of cake, he's going to think, oh, I'm helping her. No, I mean, it's a horrible thing. Like he's going to take that to other women. So
And just
when
like you've internalized the misogyny, then if he internalizes the messaging you're saying to yourself, does he then expect other women to look a certain way? And so where does that all go? Right.
Exactly.
So yeah.
And for himself too, as I discovered, right? Like where he said he didn't have the washboard abs that his friends had, and so he wouldn't go swimming. And that just broke my heart. I mean, it was one of the most heartbreaking things for me, because I knew how much he loved swimming. And over the years, he just not wanted to swim because he didn't want to be in swimming trunks.
It's
And that was a
very
big shock
sad.
for me. Like, wait, boys? Why? How did that happen? So
Right. And it happens. So
right.
speaking of your son, how did he feel about being in your book?
Mhm.
and being this example of a feminist son. I mean, that's what was really amazing, is that you don't put him on a pedestal. I definitely felt, and you don't put yourself on a pedestal. So I felt like in reading the stories, you're kind of fumbling your way through your humanity and trying to align your behavior and speech with your values. And then he's trying to do that as he goes. And some of it is totally organic, and
Mhm.
some of it requires a little bit, more tussle. And
Mhm.
so that moment where he says, "Don't say I'm going to cry, people will think I'm a pussy." And
Mhm.
that's something I heard growing up, like, don't be a pussy.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just curious how he felt about that, about how he felt exposed in that way. I'm guessing you had his permission to talk about him in this way. So I'm just curious what
Yeah.
his feeling is.
Well, so the way this worked was when I told him, "Hey, I'm writing this." He was really happy that I was doing this, that this was a book. And I even said, like, I don't know whether you want to read it. And he said, "No, what I'll do is I'm not going to read it. You just go ahead, because I don't want you to be thinking of that as you write, that oh, you're gonna."
Oh,
Yeah. So it was very freeing. And he helped me with some of the research, in fact. So he was encouraging in the best ways possible, because I
that's
do have the same fear.
amazing.
And I mean, the part that I feel like, oh gosh, is like he says, "I don't want to be any part of, like, don't ask me to be there at the book, at book launches and things like that, where people will look at me and say, oh, that guy, that's the feminist son in the book." Because he's also a very, very private person.
Okay.
And so it was great. And one thing that just gives me joy is the when I asked him to look up a few references. And so there's this document that he started, and without much thought, he titled it "For Mama's Feminist Book." And so there's this document called "For Mama's Feminist Book," which I will always, always have. I've saved it to all kinds of clouds, right?
All the clouds.
Right. Because it's for Mama's Feminist Book. And then he also introduced me to his friends, that I've quoted many of his friends, and he set up those interviews. The thing he doesn't like is the performative feminist, right? So he says, my friends and I, who are truly feminist, don't like to go about saying we are feminists, because it's become like this thing to claim now. It's become the cool thing for guys to do, and it bothers him. And so he says, of course I'm a feminist. That's like, it's, you have to be that. So I talk about that in the book as well, the predatory feminist, right? And
Yes.
performative feminist. And what we want is a partner feminist or an ally,
Yeah.
who also knows how to get out of the way. It's not about him, right?
Right.
So I think, to that thing where, for my son too, he got out of the way in the sweetest way possible. And some parts of it, sure, yeah, I would say, like, yes, wouldn't it be great to do like a combined interview or something? But no, he's also my baby, who's a very private, introverted person. So I'm going to protect that. I'm going to guard that fiercely. But he's very happy for me.
That's amazing. I love that. You talk about the waves of feminism in your book, but if you could talk about being a woman of color
Mhm.
and being a woman from another country in this country. So not only did you have the norms that you had to deal with in India, then you're acclimating to new norms and a totally different kind of racism in this country. Um, how that influences your perspective and like what you'd want white women, not in a teaching a white woman kind of way, but like what needs to kind of shift and change and how this plays out in raising feminist sons.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because when I moved to to the US, of course I was aware of its past, and the cruelty and the this and slavery and racism, but I hadn't seen it, and I didn't know how to see it, right? And so I talk about how my friend Cleo in Louisiana said, well, that was racist, and I said, oh, I don't know. And so I was like that. I was that woman, right? I was a South Asian woman who won't see it, and the anti-blackness. And that's why I believe in change, because I know I have changed so much. I came in with these notions of, no, you work hard and, it's fine. And that won't happen to me, kind of a thing. Right. And then, of course, realizing that my son was having a totally different experience from me, because I was well formed and I had a sense of confidence. I'd been a journalist and, achieved in India. So I come in here with my sense of self already, as a fully formed human being. But raising a boy here in the US made me aware so much more, in the most, terrible, like, because the last person you want is for your child to be in danger or to feel less than in some way. But raising a boy here made me so much more aware of racism and all the ways in which I was overlooking it. Um, and then also seeing how I was affected by it, and recognizing and, identifying that, wait a minute, yeah, I do work 3 times harder than any man at my university. Yes, I definitely, apologize much more. And, so these are all things, and that I'm definitely performing to whiteness, and that white women get to tell me, oh, be this way, tap into your compassion when I am angry, right? Like, where I have
You're like, why don't you fuck off, right?
right, exactly. But I couldn't, right? And I thought that's the way to be. Like, I'm trying to assimilate into a work culture that's a very white supremacist male work culture, right?
Yes.
And that's not helping white women either. So there are many instances, of white women will just sort of like throw you under the bus, or will sell out because they feel like, oh, we're next in line, right? So the sad truth is that we will not, none of us will be next in line. Again, I give the example of Hillary Clinton and the heartbreak that we all had over that. Like, wait a
Yes.
minute, right? Or Susan Blasey Ford. Am I saying that's the name, right?
Yeah.
With the Kavanaugh hearings, like, my goodness, who can be a more perfect person, in terms of all the things that we imagine, like, oh, she should be married, she's white, she's, blonde, she's got the great husband and the kids, and she's done everything right, and she's so accomplished, and we don't believe her. And so, so just seeing that we are not going to have true equality for white women, for women of color, men of color, all the things, as long as we have a white male supremacist culture, right?
Yes.
And then seeing how my son, I write about that incident where he's climbing in through the window, which, when he calls me on the phone and says, oh, something's wrong, right, I imagine that what's wrong is that he's stuck in the window. That it seems to me like, oh, that must have happened. But he says, no, what's wrong is that the neighbor called the cops as I'm climbing in through the window, because what the neighbor sees is a 17-year-old brown skinned boy climbing in through the window, right?
Right.
So that moment of seeing the way the world sees my son in America, it just woke me up, and it was just so heartbreaking. So, and then there's the incident with his stepsister, a young white girl, and I'm trying to protect her, like, she's got yoga pants on, go watch over her, but then there's an angry white man who's watching him watch her, and the story that's in his head, right? So realizing we're all going to be vulnerable in one way or the other, and each of these things has to fall in order for the other person to benefit, right?
Yeah.
So I say at the end of that chapter on race, and in the intersections of race and feminism, that I want America to look out for my son the way I'm looking out for your daughters, right? Like, I'm looking out for your daughters, all, of all colors, but with white feminists, they have to realize, like, I was looking out for that girl who's a blonde haired girl who just went to a yoga class, but my son was vulnerable in that moment. A white man that I work with, who's pretty senior at my university, said that he was looking for, he said something where someone said that may have been sexist, and he really wanted to work on it. And he felt mortified, and I could see that, like, I could see it was genuine. And he said, I went online, I was looking for books, and I wanted something like Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I wanted from a woman, because there are some books by men, but I want something from a woman. who can, lead me through that. So when is your book coming out? And I said, it's for feminists, like how to raise a feminist son, right? And he said, but there'd be something for me in it, right? And I said, yes, you're right. Of course there would, right? So I don't know.
Because he can do that with himself.
Right, exactly.
Meaning, like, as adults, we're basically tasked with raising ourselves and healing from our past trauma.
Yeah.
And so if he never got those lessons or didn't have that modeling, he
Right.
can look at your love for your son and learn from how you were with him, what's gone through, like what's happened to you.
Yeah.
Even those lists at the end, he could be like, okay, I'm going to look at what stories I'm looking at,
Right. Or even like just the chapter on failing, or that slipping up and apologizing, right? Like if men would just learn to apologize, not a fake apology, but to feel it, to feel remorse and say, oh my God, I fucked up, and I genuinely want to change this because it doesn't feel good to me. I don't feel good about this, right? And that's what he was doing. And so I think, yeah. So I mean, not to throw like oh, it's for everyone.
But it is, and everyone should buy it, really.
I mean, maybe not the guy on Twitter who said, why didn't you just cut his dick off instead of like trying to raise a feminist?
That was one of my favorite things. There were a couple of things because I took screen grabs because I was reading on it a PDF. The thing that I have here where it says, make no mistake, he would need his dick to fuck like a feminist, which I loved. Right. But I also love that you were like, believe me, my son's dick is intact. So I love that you were kind of speaking to that yes, like you're not trying to take away anyone's dick. So anyways, the last thing, because I don't want to keep you forever. If you were to have like one really important thing to say to a father, a mother, or however anyone identifies as a caretaker of a young boy, what would you think the most important takeaway is? Like something that someone can do immediately other than buy your book, which I want everyone to do.
Thank you. What would I say? Like find the joy in it, find the joy, like take a deep breath and first like just fall in love with the boy, right? Fall in love with your child, fall in love with the process of parenting, and then find the joy in it's. Like it's been such a joy to raise my son, to be a parent, and then to be a feminist parent, because the payoff is so great. It's just like little things that he says and does that just let me live a fuller life, and that push me to live a fuller life and a more self-respecting one, right? So I think that is something that just find joyful ways and fun ways, like the movies, like our thing was the going to the movies. So find fun ways in which to center this idea of raising a tender-hearted, sharp-witted son. I realized after this book was written, and some of my South Asian friends heard that they read that I'd written this book, that it's also a permission to other South Asian women to tell their stories and to break through that culture of shame, and to see like I'm okay, like I'm okay. There's no like ostracization. I haven't lost friends, and that we can talk about these things. And so let's more and more of us tell these stories, because it's not going to serve us to have that culture of shame and to be silent. It hasn't served us. It's not going to serve us. It's not going to serve our children.